and we are back with our second episode. So exciting. This is called We Are the Change, and I'm so excited to introduce Dr. Professor Elisa Caruth. Woo!
Wow, what an entrance. Thank you.
Yeah! She is our lovely and English, correct? But you teach so much more than just English here on campus. And to be quite honest, I've made good friends with her the past semester. She's no longer my teacher, so I can call her my friend.
Right. 100%.
But anything you'd like to say for yourself quickly?
I'm so happy to be here. It is such an honor to be working with you in this professional capacity and to be a guest on We Are the Change. An amazing podcast. Everybody, listen to this.
Yes! Oh my goodness. We've actually talked many times. She's kind of become a liaison for me in general. And today's episode is actually about mental health because we both have experience just talking to each other with it. But we do want to preface.
Yes. So just to make absolutely clear, I'm an English professor at Oxnard College. I swear I can say the name of where I teach. So I'm not a mental health care professional. I have an interest in mental health, so I consider myself a mental health advocate. I've studied mental health and mental health resources for my dissertation that I completed a few years ago. I also teach mental health, self-care practices, and self-compassion in my English 101 classes. So this is not meant to diagnose or prescribe. And if you are truly feeling any kind of severe anxiety or mental distress, seek a professional healthcare provider such as those that we have on campus. Valita asked me to talk about this because she and I have talked a lot about it, because I'm an advocate for mental health and mental health resources, and because I have experience with my friends, my loved ones, and the students in my classes. And of course, I'm concerned about their overall academic well-being, but I'm concerned about them as a whole person and how they function in the world, because how we function in the world and care for ourselves certainly can impact how we function in our classes and in our professional lives. So that's what led us here today to talk about mental health and self-compassion and mindfulness. And it couldn't come at a more relevant time considering our world's a little bit stressful.
Very stressful in certain cases. And I wanted to bring up just a little bit of, because in mainstream media so far, mental health has become resurfacing and really kind of becoming this vague topic. And I wanted to go into the nuances because we have anxiety, we have depression, and people just think that it's this. But within those different umbrellas, the dichotomy and the branches that go down of anxiety and depression alone, and those are just two huge examples. There are numerous amounts. But I digress. With anxiety, students suffer, unfortunately, in many different ways.
They do.
And it manifests in different ways, and people think when it's one way, what I'm going through is not anxiety, when it doesn't look exactly like the script we're given.
Right.
So I wanted to ask you of just like little things that are physically or mentally you see in your students that are little tics, little tricks for them as well for those tics.
Sure, I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah, okay.
So what I know, I teach both online and face-to-face classes, right? So in my face-to-face classes, like you were in one of my face-to-face classes.
Yes.
If you walked into the class, I'm just going to use you as an example.
That's amazing.
Okay.
We can talk about me.
We'll do a hypothetical example. But I know Valita well, right? Because she took my class. We talk a lot outside of class. We bounce ideas off for the podcast. But if she walked in one day and she was like, you know, kind of wilting, because I know her as very bubbly and vibrant and energetic. That to me, as an instructor and as an empathetic human being, I would say, what's going on? So if I was comfortable with the student like I am with Valita, I would say, hey, are you okay? Or I would reach out via email. Another thing that I do for my fully online classes where I don't get to see my students, but you can sort of tell with their participation and what they write and how they write it, which is maybe just an insight for English teachers, but I'm sure for all of my colleagues, they have other different ways that they can check in with their students. For example, what I'll do is I'll give these assignments. I'll just say, how are you? And we've talked a little bit about this, that I've noticed since the pandemic and slightly prior to the pandemic, students will be very honest and say, well, I'm anxious or I'm depressed or I don't want to get out of bed or I'm having racing thoughts. And for many, many years, I've tried to help my students focus on positive life changes, right? How can we participate in our lives positively? How can we make a positive contribution to our community? How can we co-create our communities in our classrooms, in our lives, in our homes, in our communities at large here in Ventura County or wherever we may live? So we've talked about things like anxiety mitigation techniques. And these are techniques. Again, I'm not a mental health care provider. So if you wanted to dig deeper into why you're being triggered or why you're having anxiety, that's something to do with a trained mental health care professional. But in the moment, we can breathe, we can do tactile things. There's a lot that we can do. And my students will reveal to me different ways they're anxious through check-ins or my observations, just different little things so that I can say, how are you doing? Are you okay? Or, what music are you listening to right now? True story. I did a little check-in. What music are you listening to right now? And this was early pandemic. And so one of my students emailed back. He said, well, I'm listening to Suicide Boys. I don't know who this band is. Do you guys know Suicide Boys? Have you ever heard? Okay. It's like BOY $, something like that. And posted the lyrics. And guess what it was about? So I'm sitting in my kitchen reading this because it's 2020 and I'm freaking out. So I'm like, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? And finally I could hear the eye roll in the email back to me. I'm fine. It's just a song. But if I read something like that, I get alarmed because I want to make sure you're okay. So if somebody's like, well, I'm listening to Taylor Swift all the time, and they're like, well, now I'm listening to Ministry and Tool, I'll be like, that's a shift. Yeah. I like Ministry and I like Tool too, but that's a big shift. So little things like that. And then we can go from there. Like you and I have talked about in the moment when I'm shaking, my heart's racing, my stomach feels like I'm on a roller coaster. How do I mitigate that fight, flight, freeze, fade, appease? How do I take control of my nervous system?
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that we talk about. And mindfulness, breathing, like I said, tactile. We were just talking yesterday about our own anxieties, right, with the world. So I said, let's go outside. Let's take a walk. Let's breathe the fresh air. Let's get some sunshine. And I think let's have a protein shake. Were you drinking a protein shake? Okay, yeah. I had one this morning. I was like, oh, good idea. So all of those little things. And then we walk back and we're like, I feel better, right? So those are some of the things that I do to check in with my students. And again, it was extant before the pandemic, but I've noticed it increasingly so since the pandemic, since the recent election. There's a lot of things that we're all feeling. And sometimes this can be classified, depending on the circumstance, as what's called collective trauma. And certainly during the pandemic, it was what I would say as collective trauma, which basically means it's a traumatic event that we're all experiencing to greater or lesser extent. And we all experienced, to greater or lesser extent, traumatic events during the pandemic. And many of us are still healing from that, and that's fine. That's perfectly okay. We're human, and it takes time, and it takes progress, and it takes breathing and being present.
Yes. There's a big thing that you brought up, and it's safety. And a lot of people think my safety is dependent on my outside experience, my outside environment, and that's not necessarily true. It can be very much inside, and there is a lot of shame and a lot of doubt when it comes to your mental health because it is a very internal struggle that everyone goes through differently. And that's why there's that just big expansive misunderstanding between each other, because I do suffer from anxiety. I'm sure a lot of people do, and it manifests differently in all of us. And a big thing that made me feel different and not necessarily not diagnosable, because you don't need to be diagnosed to have anxiety, but it was just the very physical reaction, the fight, flight, appease. And there's this one that I used to identify with, but it's fawn. And that's a big one that I also noticed that people try to shrug off and make invaluable, but it's not. When you feel that uncomfortable feeling of like, I have to please this person or I have to please this environment to feel safe, to make everyone feel safe, that's part of the process of anxiety. And people think, oh, I'm just a people pleaser, I'm just nice. And it's more than that.
Much more.
Yeah. Yeah, I was like, we talked about this briefly yesterday, so if you wanted to.
Well, it's a great point that you bring up because when we go into fight, flight, freeze, fade, appease, fawn, we're triggering our nervous system to protect ourselves, right? This goes way, way back. And again, I'm not a brain researcher, so if you are and I'm misspeaking, please correct me, but it's our amygdala that kicks into gear, right? I got to be safe. We're not being chased by a lion. That's not happening. That would be strange. And that's an appropriate reaction to want to get out, right? But we can be in an unsafe environment or what we perceive as an unsafe environment. And that can be something even as simple as daily an experience as a quiz, right? Or a test.
Yes.
I have a lot of students who've said to me, I have test anxiety. Right? Cool. I get it. And the way that I approach quizzes or exams in my class is I want you to show off what you know. I'm not here to trick you, fool you, or fail you. Let's work together. So that's one way of calming down. But you brought up a really good word and a really good situation, fawning, people pleasing. To a certain extent, some of us are more people pleasers than others. And that's basically to keep us safe in an environment that we find threatening. Because if somebody else is happy, they're not going to hurt me. And if I've made this person calm, they're not going to hurt me. And that's fine. It's a coping mechanism. But when we get out of that environment and we're exhausted and our nervous system is shot from all of the adrenaline and cortisol that's been pumping through our system, that's where we start to go to work on repairing. And that's where the anxiety for me in my own anxiety adventures, that could be a sub name or a title for this episode, Anxiety Adventures. And I don't mean to make light of it because anxiety is very serious and it is diagnosable. And there are medications for it. Again, that I'm not going to get into. Yes. I do not have any expertise in that. That's just, what I know from people reporting to me. But then we have to, outside of that moment, how do we calm our nervous systems? And that's where, for me, reflection, self-reflection is a very big tool. And we've talked a lot about, Valida and I, something that I wrote about in my dissertation, and I'm very proud of it. I did all this research for this one sentence. Within self-awareness, you have choice. So if you're self-aware, hey, I'm in an unsafe situation, if you can't get out, then how do you stay safe? If you can get out, get out. If you need help, call 911. If you need to reach out to somebody, go to somebody who you can trust. Go to a professor or your counselor or campus police or mental health care services on campus. There are people here who you may never meet who care about you and who want to make sure you're safe and looked after. So there are people on campus. And if you don't know who to reach out to, come see me. Talk to Valida and she can get in touch with me. Go see campus police or go to our health center. Again, there are people who care about you who can help. But if we're not in that situation, and now we're after that, oh my gosh, I just did all of this stuff, now I'm exhausted. There's a few things that we can do. So I'm a big proponent of breath work and how to breathe to calm our nervous systems down. So we talked a little bit yesterday about box breathing. We talked about meditation. And these are certain techniques that you can tap into your nervous system when you feel that jittery or that stomach. I was doing it before we started filming because I'm like, oh, there's lights and cameras and this is fancy. So, and I immediately thought, oh, wow, shaking, my heart's beating. Where do I look? Which camera? So I started to breathe. And it's a controlled breathing where you very slowly inhale to the count of 4 or 5, hold at the top for a heartbeat. Exhale very slowly for a count of 4 or 5. Hold at the bottom of the breath for a heartbeat. And you can do this 2 or 3 times, and you'll notice that I'm feeling better. If you want to embody it even more, because we're so externally focused, right? Like what's happening over there, what's happening over here, rather than what's happening in me. You can even, uncross, like I'm sitting cross-legged because I'm like, But you can, get your circulation going. Put your hands on your palms. Put your hand on your heart. Gently close your eyes if you would like, or look down. And then you can practice box breathing or slowing your breath. And this is another way of becoming embodied. So whether it's an anxiety attack, or you're sick, or you have to get your blood drawn because you're getting a physical or something like that, this is something that you can do very quietly. One of the things that I like to do is, I can't put my feet on the floor because I'm too short for this sofa, but if you can put your feet on the floor, do that. Have a hand on the sofa arm or on your chest. And I'll even do this in the middle of class if I'm feeling anxious. Just take a breath, just get embodied, get within that self-awareness, practice that breathing, and then we can work more on our self-compassion, which might be another episode. We can talk about self-compassion.
That could.
And how that, relates to some of our anxiety mitigation techniques.
Because a big thing I struggle with personally is just that darkness, that when the anxiety comes over, because not everyone's the same, but mine's very much like, you're horrible, and it's just, it brings you down, not just mentally, but physically. You feel it. For me, it's in my chest. I start to feel that tightness, and I start to feel it in my shoulders. I will start to cramp up, and it is not fun. And unless I do something about it, it'll stay there for a month if I really don't address it. So that's kind of the scary thing too with mental health. Yes, it's more of an internal, it's more in the head, but it can manifest physically without repair, without treatment, as we're talking about. So that's why it's so important to just put as much work as you possibly can. And when the time is right, obviously, if it's hard for you to breathe in that very moment that you're taking that test, that's okay. Take that breath. It takes 5 seconds to just do a little breathing exercise, even a whole minute. A whole minute can do wonders to the brain, to the body, to the mind, everything. And it's just so important that this campus and the students know that they have safe spaces on campus. Like, I want to reiterate it so many times because we have counselors.
Yes.
We have a whole system, because depending on where your anxiety is coming from, we have different departments for almost, I feel, every part. Like financially, if you're dealing with something kind of, we do have lawyers, and we do have just the ASG building who have resources of food, if that's the anxieties, or clothing as well. Please access all of them. They're here for us as students. So I just want to just create a safe space with this podcast for the students, because I just hear so many people every single day, I need this, I need this, I need this, and I tell them where to go, and they come back to me, and they're like, oh my God, I had no idea. So I want to spread knowledge, I want to spread positive energy, and just an understanding and community with amongst each other, because we are so isolated because of the pandemic. We grew so apart from one another, and this next generation of young people is so pulled apart compared to when, and I'm not that old, but
Girl, I'm like twice as old as you are.
But it's so sad to me to see how disconnected they feel compared to when I was that age, because maybe I didn't know whoever down the block, but I knew them, and I could go to them, and I could ask them for something, and it wasn't this transactional thing.
Oh,
And so, I feel that transaction now, but it's slowly dying through once you get connected with your community. And it's been such a heartwarming and like disarming thing to come back and to be not just celebrated, but like hugged. So I want to bring that to the rest of the campus, that you are loved, you are cared for. Everyone here wants you to have a better life, have a better education, and that's a promise.
Yes, 100%. And going back to some of the campus resources, we also have the Dream Resource Center, which can help some of our dreamers and some of our undocumented community members. A lot of our student clubs, we've had our Rainbow Cafe for our LGBT plus community. And we have a lot of different communities. So if you are feeling like I don't belong, you do. There is a community here at Oxnard College for you. And it is a community that's built on cultural wealth, where we value diversity. We value who you are and where you come from and your heritage and culture. So if you're feeling any kind of stress and you're like, well, I don't know if I want to talk, right? You have mental health resources through our health center. I can't stress that enough. You have resources through the Dream Resource Center. I want to stress that so much because we have so many students who are fearful of, I can't believe I'm going to say it, raids. Never did I think I would see this in my life in this country, but here we are today. And there are people here who can help you. Go to the Dream Resource Center. If you have housing or food insecurity, as Valita mentioned, we have our basic needs center. Go see Rosa. She's wonderful.
That's actually a perfect segue
Oh,
because
right?
she's next week's interview. And that is unfortunately the end of today's episode.
Perfect
Yeah, that's why I
timing.
was like, that's a great segue into that. So next week we will have Rosa and Layla on the podcast talking about everything we kind of just touched on at the end here.
Yeah. Awesome. Glad to help with the segue.
Yeah, that's why I was like, wow, it worked out perfectly.
We didn't even plan that, but we vibe.
Bing bong.
Bing bong.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
This was Dr. Professor Elisa Caruso, everybody.